black and white. I'd say about a third of what I do is in black and white. And black and white seems to be becoming increasingly popular among a lot of photographers. So the question is, how do you achieve black and white? I personally find the controls that are in Lightroom to be absolutely ideal. I've looked at some of the third-party conversion software that's out there, and it seems redundant to me. If you want to make your shots look like ADOX 25 or Panatomic X or Tri-X or any of the old black and white films, yeah, I suppose there's a merit there, but why would you?
I think a lot of people are overcome by the apparent complexity of the black and white conversion. It was originally done by Mark Hamburg. I tried to get Thomas Knoll to do black and white in camera raw for the longest time, and Thomas shoots color. Right. Black and white was just not on his radar. Right. But Mark Hamburg came up with this, and the thing about it is that when you've got a color image, you have kind of a unlimited palette of panchromatic conversion, which is like the old days shooting black and white.
Exactly, and we'd go out in the field typically with a red, a yellow, an orange, and a green filter. So we could darken skies, lighten foliage.
Several yellows, actually.
Yeah, right.
So what ends up happening is that when you've got your color image, you've got the makings of an infinite array of panchromatic conversions. And Lightroom and Camera Raw has a very powerful one. Now, that's not to say that you can't look at third-party tools.
No, they're fine. It's just I don't see the need for them.
Yeah. A lot of it becomes a question of familiarity and developing your craft. And you've become very proficient in doing your black and white conversions in Lightroom. And just a point of reference, panchromatic means that when
all
you shot
colors.
Black and white, yes, pan meaning across, chromatic meaning color. Back in the old days when Ansel Adams first started shooting and doing development by inspection, he was actually using orthochromatic film, which was only sensitive to blue light. So
and
he
you
could
have
work
a
in a red
safe light.
And then panchromatic film came out and you had to work in total darkness. So it was a little hard to develop by inspection.
Right.
But I think going from a color image to a black and white image, there is a lot of craft and artistry to that. So let's
do it. But also just let me add on that note of discussing tools and third-party plugins. Yeah, they're interesting to look at. Unfortunately, most of them have free trial periods, or they'll put a watermark, and so you can play with them. Frankly, I like to the greatest extent that I can, I like to master a tool. So its use just becomes intuitive. And if you hop around and you try too many different things, you end up being master of none. So that's, people say, well, why don't you also use aperture? Why don't you use Camera Raw? Because Camera Raw is so similar. I've focused on Lightroom. I've made Lightroom my tool of choice. And it kind of is like playing an instrument. You just become familiar and comfortable with it. So,
well, part of that actually is something that we were talking about before. It's achieving your craft, and we were talking about the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah, right. That's an important one.
Yes, where basically when you start doing anything, and particularly flying, when you start flying, or start doing anything like gymnastics or anything that requires a great deal of practice, skill, and accumulation of skills and experience, about 10,000 hours. And
10,000 hours is 5 years of full-time work.
Yeah.
So, but if you think about it, people becoming doctors. So between university and residency, and so it's over 5 years. It's about 8 years. Lawyers is about 4 or 5 years. Really,
it always made me nervous. No, to go to a doctor and they have their practice, and doctors practice. It's a practicing doctor, and it's like, I really don't want to get practiced on.
There's a digression.
Yes.
Okay, so, and the only way, here's the bottom line on what we're saying, the only way to get those 10,000 hours, the only way to become a master of your craft and your tool is don't flit around. Don't spend your time trying so many different things. Focus on one.
Don't be a software butterfly.
So let's look at this shot. Now, as you know, I now spent half the year living in San Miguel, Mexico. This interesting building actually is the Starbucks. And I had just received the Fuji X100 for testing. I love this little camera. I also hate it, but I love it. It's wonderful image quality, frustrating user interface, but that's another story. And I think it was literally the first day that I went out with it. And I was literally just crossing the street, and I saw the little girl and the woman sitting in the corner. And I stopped, picked the camera up, took the shot, almost got hit by a car, but that's the price you pay for being a photographer. And when I got home, I saw there was something there, because obviously I thought there was when I took the shot, but what was it? So now let me skip to the final result. This is the image, which I think has some power to it. It has strong graphic elements, strong tonalities. I like the fact that you hardly see the elderly woman's face. You see the young girl's face, and she's looking off in the distance. There was a
nicely lit too.
The light is lovely. There was a balance to it, and I think this is one of the things that sometimes people have a hard time with, is how do you go from this to this? And
look at it in server so that you can see both at once. Yeah. It really is interesting that the color is kind of a soft bland, might have been worked on in color to improve it, but going to the black and white basically made the shot.
But the interesting point, and you'll see as I step through the various things that I did, the important point here is that I didn't know at the time that I shot it, nor even as I was starting to work on the image, I didn't know it was going to end up being black and white. That's a decision I made along the way. And let me go to the develop module.
You have a lot of history.
Okay. So, for those who aren't familiar with the history, the way Lightroom works, the history palette, everything that you do in Lightroom is virtual. You're not really changing things the way you do in Photoshop. You're not bit mangling. It's just a series of instructions.
Yeah.
Now you do this, now you do that. So
parametric editing. Editing
Exactly.
the parameters, not the pixels.
Exactly. So here, every file has something called import. And this was on March 30th at 7:32 p.m. I'd probably just finished dinner, and now I sat down to work on my files. So I'm just going to work through. I'm not going to spend much time on too many of these things, but I'll drill down once we get to the black and white conversion. Okay, so first thing I did was straightened it. And then I cropped it a little. And then I cropped it some more. And then I cropped it some more. And then I changed the angle again. And let me just say this in terms of the process of editing. I like to crop first, and the reason I do that is I don't want anything on the screen that isn't going to be in the final image to be distracting me. You know, maybe it's someone's foot over here stepping in or whatever it is. So, and that applies to just every aspect of the image. I try and drill down, reduce, and get it down to its essence. So next item, it says white balance, custom. So you can see I've
Cooled it down a little bit.
Yeah, cooled it down a little bit. Set the black point. But then I set the black point a bit stronger than I should, because what I like to do then is use fill light to open it up.
Yeah, that was something that
Thomas taught us.
Yes, that you can clamp the blacks and then lighten the toe of the curve. It's a way of kind of modifying or mitigating because the black clip point. Because my experience is the black clip compared to the white clip, it is so tweaky. You move it a little bit, and you know the difference between 5 and 6 and 7 can be substantial, but you don't want to step on the toe too much. So clip it and then raise the toe a little bit using the fill light.
Yeah.
Another crop angle.
Yeah, just trying to get it. Well, and part of the problem here is you've got all these angles coming together, and sometimes the actual bubble level angle isn't the angle that you want it to be. You want it to look right, not necessarily be technically correct. And again, that's a rabbit hole that a lot of photographers go down. They try and seek technical perfection instead of aesthetic perfection. But that's a whole other digression. Okay, now watch, this is an interesting one, vertical perspective. So I just,
Yep.
that little bit, so, because I was pointing downwards. I'm standing up here at about 5'10", and I'm looking
Is that
down.
how tall you are?
I'm not telling you how
Okay.
tall I am. Vertical perspective again. Crop the rectangle. Crop the rectangle. So again, I'm just trying to zero in.
You kind of sneak up on it, don't you?
It's an iterative process. Yeah. Clarity, just punch it up a little bit. Fill light, lighten it a little bit. Brightness, darken it a little bit.
Well, darken it from the middle.
Yes.
The brightness slider in Lightroom and Camera Raw works from the middle after your white point and black point clipping points are set. So as you move either one of those, you'll probably have to readjust.
Exactly.
The brightness.
And that's why it's iterative. You don't just move something once and then leave it. You just need to go back and forth and fine tune. Okay, so now I was at this point, I had a pretty good looking color image, and it's at this point that I thought, it's just a postcard. It's just a pretty picture.
Wasn't working for you.
It just didn't work. So I converted to black and white. Now something's starting to happen. I went, oh yeah. And I remember thinking that. Now, the next item, if you look here, says preset split 50-50-0. And what that is, let me open up the tab. Up here in my presets, I have this one called split 50-50-0. And all that is, and let me click on it, and keep your eye over here on split toning. And it
You set
sets
the color.
the color in both the highlights and the shadow region to number 50. Now that color is a kind of a creamy, beigey, not quite sepia. It's just a color I like. Other people will find different colors. Now at this point,
But no color has shown up yet.
no color has shown yet because the saturation slider is on 0. So what I do, whenever I go to black and white, I automatically hit preset split 50-50, which I named, I created that. And now I know that if I want to add a little bit of tone to the highlights or the shadows, I can. And I hit shadow saturation. And you'll notice the shadow slider has now moved up to 16, and that's a value that I obviously at the time found. So here we go. This is kind of bluey looking, but by adding that little bit of tone, it gives it a little bit of
And just in the shadows. So
Just
you're
the shadows,
warming from
exactly.
the shadows up.
Exactly.
And so that the highlights or that kind of cooler looking before.
So now I've got warm shadows and coolish highlights. So the next thing I did is I went, whoa, that's kind of bright down there. So I added a grad filter. I then adjusted the exposure on it.
And again.
And I did it again. I wanted it even darker. I added a grad filter at the top. I corrected the density of the grad filter. I corrected it again because I'd gone too far. Now I went back to color. I wanted to see what it looked like in color so I could remember the tonal values. So in other words, this is red, her shawl's blue, that stripe over there is yellow. So now I went back to black and white, and now I went to red-gray level. And you notice what's happened. And then I went, and I'll come back to these, I went to the purple-gray level, and then I went off and did some other things. And what I was doing here was I was adjusting the color relationships. This is like shooting on black and white film, panchromatic, shooting all colors, and putting on filters. And that's, to me, the real power of this. And that, frankly, is what so many of these third-party plugins do to give you a look, quote unquote, is they change these colors. Look at what happens here. See how muddy the old woman's shawl is? And now how it, all of a sudden, it just opens up.
And you could do some of that yourself with the adjustment brush, but it's much easier just to control the color rendering.
Oh yeah, no, I could have gone in and lightened that and all the rest of it. But now you see, it's changed, not just her shawl, but it's lightened this up again. So I might want to go back and change the grad filter. Iterative process. You go round and round and round until you get there. Okay, so the next thing I did was sharpening, and I put on a mask, which you can't see, and then I sharpened. And let me just quickly go here. And we're going to come back and we're going to cover sharpening and all of that in more detail. But here's the way it was before sharpening. Here's the way it was with sharpening. Not whack you in the head, you know, but...
Subtle.
It's subtle, but it's there. And this lens and sensor on the Fuji happened to be so terrific that, I mean, this is a 12 megapixel camera, and it's just producing amazing quality. Okay, so post-crop vignette. We were joking when we were talking about something else before, about how we have all these wonderful lenses that are designed not to vignette, and then we have all the tools for automatically vignette removal, and then we add vignetting. But it's an aesthetic thing. It just looks better focusing the eye down. Added a little fill light, cropped again, cropped again, and ta-da! Here's the final image, and here's when I printed this. So now I'm going to go into the printing part of Lightroom, and we're going to make a print, and we'll see what we ended up with. The thing that needs to be looked at here is how you print a toned image. Because, and I know you're going to do something on black and white printing a little further on, but the important point here in terms of printing an image, remember I added that little bit of tone to the shadows, is you don't print it as black and white, you print it as color, which means having a full color managed workflow, which we'll touch on separately. I've got my Canson Barita Photographique R3000 profile loaded.
That's the profile that you made.
Profile we made. Let's see, the native resolution on this is 190.
Yeah.
So
Take
I'm
it up to 360.
Resing it up to 360. And we're going to have a separate discussion about print resolution. It's a big topic. But I'm just going to res it up to 360. Now, let's do a full disclosure on print sharpening. It's not just that you like this print sharpening and the sharpening within the develop module. You helped create it.
Well, we kind of sold it to Adobe.
Oh, okay. Because Pixel Genius, which is you and your group of colleagues, came up with some very powerful print sharpening software over the years.
PhotoKit Sharpener, and we just released PhotoKit Sharpener 2.
Right.
Thomas Knoll was impressed enough that he wanted Bruce to work with him on the sharpening sliders in Camera Raw and Lightroom, and then thought it would be a good idea to actually license the routines and the technology to go into Lightroom. So the last time that we were doing that, it had just been talked about, and so now it's built into Lightroom.
Okay. You have three choices here: low, standard, and high, and media type, matte and glossy. And so those are potentially 6 different combinations of sharpening that you can apply.
Well, I was going to say, show the standard. This is kind of funny because Mac Holbert used to think that one of the Pixel Genius members, even before he joined Pixel Genius, he thought that standard was a little bit too low, so we made high for him. And then JP always thought that our sharpening was a little too high, so we made the low for JP. So it could be JP, standard, and Mac.
And I think that's important that people understand. This stuff here in Lightroom and Camera Raw and Photoshop isn't just from the minds of engineers. No. There is a community of photographers, who end up contributing to the aesthetic aspects. The engineers write the code, and they often have very good ideas, but it's photographers and printers and people in the industry who have input into...
Well, one of Camera Raw's secret weapons is Thomas, because he's actually a very good photographer. He's been on a number of workshops with you, and we've been to Antarctica, and so, he's not just an engineer.
No, it's fascinating. And he's not a very talkative guy. And one of the things that's fun about going shooting with Thomas, particularly if you find yourself in a car or on a ship, is eventually he starts talking. And you learn some fascinating stuff.
ETTR, for example.
Exposed to the right, which he talked about when we were driving together on a little private shoot that we were doing in Iceland. And he started explaining it, and I literally pulled over. I was driving. I pulled over to the side of the road.
You had an epiphany?
And Chris was in the car. And, well, I didn't have an epiphany. I just didn't understand what he was saying.
Oh, okay.
When you're dealing with someone with an IQ of 190, sometimes it's like, oh, no, wait a sec, my brain hurts. And we pulled over, and he explained the whole concept of exposed to the right. Mm-hmm. So, and then I wrote it up when I got back. So it's kind of fun.
So are you going to print that puppy?
Finally. Yeah. Oh, let me just hit print. Okay. Here it is.
Very nice. I love the color. I'm going to have to steal that technique.
Yeah, it's that 50-50-0. There's the technique. Mm-hmm. Let me just hold it up so the camera can see it.
Kind of a platinum color, but a little warmer than platinum. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But again, not a brown tone.
No, it's not a brown tone. It's just a creamy, beigey. It's a sweet color and just tiny little subtle move of the sliders. I really like this shot. So it's quite remarkable that, and let me just go back here to this view, you know, that you can go from something that might be a snapshot. Oh, I was crossing the street, took a picture, but then become something that, I mean, this is going to go in my portfolio.
Yeah, it's worthy.
Yeah. That's black and white.
Well, for you.
For me. Now, you're going to do black and white.
Yeah, I've got a slightly different take.
Hey, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.